It was 2008, and the world had yet to truly recognize the name Khabib Nurmagomedov. Born in the highlands of Dagestan, Russia, Khabib's journey to greatness was far from ordinary. His early years were steeped in a rigorous combat sports environment, a tradition passed down from his father, who was a wrestler and a coach. Khabib's passion for fighting was ignited at a young age, and his natural talent was quickly evident. He wrestled from the age of 8, and by the time he was a teenager, he was already winning titles in multiple disciplines, including judo, sambo, and freestyle wrestling. While others in his region pursued different paths, Khabib's destiny was sealed by his relentless pursuit of perfection. His tenacity in the gym, his discipline, and his unbreakable will to succeed were the cornerstones of his future. But it wasn't just his skills that made Khabib unique, it was his mindset. Khabib had a vision to be the best, to conquer the world of mixed martial arts. And in 2012, he was on the verge of something monumental. UFC 148 was the moment when Khabib was beginning to truly make waves. He was still a young fighter, hungry to prove himself on the world stage. His UFC debut had been impressive, and now he was getting his chance against a seasoned veteran, Gleison Tibau. Gleison Tibau, the Brazilian force. On the other side of the cage stood Gleison Tibau, a man who had been around the block. Tibau was an experienced and tough Brazilian fighter, known for his grappling and his ability to control opponents in the clinch. He had been competing in the UFC for several years by this point, earning a reputation as a durable and gritty fighter. Tibau was no stranger to high-level competition, having faced some of the most feared fighters in the sport. His Brazilian jiu-jitsu skills were top-notch, and his strength was often a deciding factor in his victories. But despite his accomplishments, Tibau was often overlooked. The spotlight tended to shine on other fighters in his division, and Tibau, despite his formidable skills, had yet to secure a breakthrough moment. He had been in the UFC for years, but now, in 2012, he was facing a new generation of fighters like Khabib, who were eager to make a name for themselves. For Tibau, UFC 148 was more than just a fight. It was an opportunity to prove that he belonged in the upper echelon of the lightweight division. He had faced many tough challenges before, but none quite like Khabib. Tibau knew that his ability to defend against Khabib's wrestling and control the pace of the fight would be crucial to his success. The build-up to the battle, as the day of UFC 148 approached, the anticipation grew. The fight was billed as a clash of styles, Khabib's relentless wrestling and pressure against Tibau's strong grappling and striking. Fans were eager to see how these two would match up inside the octagon. Khabib, the young and hungry contender, was looking to take the next step in his career. Tibau, the veteran, was determined to show that his experience and skills could overcome the new wave of talent that was taking over the UFC. Khabib was calm and focused in the lead-up to the fight. His usual demeanor was one of confidence, but it was clear that he respected Tibau's abilities. He knew that this would be one of the toughest challenges of his career. Tibau, on the other hand, was determined. He knew that Khabib was a rising star, but he had no intention of being a stepping stone in Khabib's ascent. As the fighters entered the arena, the tension in the air was palpable. Fans filled the seats, and the energy in the building was electric. This was the moment of truth. The stakes were high, and both fighters were ready to prove that they were the better man. Round 1, the bell rang, and both fighters came out of their corners, determined to impose their will. Khabib, as always, was the aggressor, closing the distance quickly with his powerful wrestling style. Tibau, knowing the danger Khabib posed on the ground, used his striking to keep Khabib at bay, landing a few solid kicks and punches. But Khabib was relentless. He pressured Tibau against the cage, looking for openings. Tibau tried to defend with his striking and clinch game, but Khabib's pressure was suffocating. The young Dagestani fighter showed his ability to transition seamlessly between striking and grappling, always keeping his opponent guessing. Tibau, though experienced, seemed to be struggling with Khabib's pace. As the round progressed, Khabib's control of the center of the cage became more apparent. Tibau's striking was effective, but Khabib's constant forward movement and pressure kept Tibau on the defensive. Khabib's ability to control the distance was impressive. His striking was sharp, and his takedown attempts were relentless. Tibau had no choice but to fight on the back foot, trying to fend off Khabib's attacks. By the end of the first round, it was clear that Khabib had the edge. Tibau had shown his toughness and experience, but Khabib's pace and pressure were too much for the Brazilian. The second round began, and Khabib continued where he left off. He closed the distance quickly and began to take control of the fight once again. Tibau, however, had made adjustments. He was more measured in his approach, trying to avoid Khabib's pressure and landing a few clean shots to the body. But Khabib's game plan was unyielding. He was relentless in his pursuit of the takedown, and despite Tibau's best efforts, he couldn't keep Khabib off him. Khabib's striking was crisp and calculated, setting up his wrestling perfectly. When Khabib finally got Tibau to the ground, the Brazilian's jiu-jitsu skills were tested. Tibau fought hard to defend, but Khabib's ground control was suffocating. In the latter half of the round, Tibau seemed to be slowing down. His ability to defend against Khabib's takedown attempts was diminishing, and Khabib's conditioning seemed to be superior. The Dagestani fighter was controlling the action on the ground, landing heavy ground and pound while keeping Tibau in a defensive position. As the second round came to an end, the fight was increasingly one-sided. Khabib's pressure and pace were overwhelming, and Tibau was unable to mount any significant defense. Round 3. By the third round, it was clear that Khabib had established his dominance. Tibau, though a warrior, seemed to have little left in the tank. Khabib's unrelenting pace, his wrestling, and his ability to mix up his attacks were too much for Tibau to handle. Tibau continued to fight back, but Khabib was in complete control. The Brazilian's defensive wrestling was solid, but Khabib's relentless pressure and his ability to control every aspect of the fight were too overwhelming. As the final bell rang, there was no question about the outcome. Khabib had controlled every round, using his superior wrestling, conditioning, and striking to dominate Tibau. The judge's decision was unanimous, and Khabib emerged victorious, his undefeated streak continuing. Part 3. The Aftermath. After the fight, Khabib was elated, but not surprised. This was what he had trained for, and this victory was just another step in his journey to the top. He knew that the road ahead would be filled with even tougher challenges, but he was ready. He had proven that he belonged in the UFC, and he had earned the respect of the fans and his fellow fighters. Tibau, though defeated, held his head high. He had fought valiantly, but Khabib's pressure and wrestling had been too much for him. Tibau had shown glimpses of his skills, but Khabib was simply on another level. The Brazilian veteran knew that he had given it his all, but on that night, it wasn't enough. For Khabib, the victory was another step toward greatness. Little did anyone know, this fight would be a turning point in his career, a moment when the world would start to take notice of the unstoppable force from Dagestan.